All right, so in 2011, a man named Gert-Jan Ozcam was paralyzed from the waist down following a motorcycling incident. In May 2023, 12 years later, Global News did a segment on the brain and spine implants that allowed this man to walk again. Following training sessions, Ozcam can now walk 100 meters unsupported. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Kassem, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the life-changing research and development behind medical devices. So my three main points are going to be context and ideas around medical devices, regulations that govern some of these devices, and also some significant examples of these technological advances. So it's one thing to recognize the words implants and paralysis and create a link to medicine, but what exactly is a medical device? So the Food and Drug Act defines medical devices as instruments used in treatment, mitigation, diagnosis, or prevention of a disease or abnormal physical condition. This definition includes the implants given to Ozcam, and it also allows for a variety of solutions that can be found anywhere from neural implants to common everyday things like toothbrushes and also decorative contact lenses. So two medical device projects I've been involved in include one, the assay robot developed with the engineering group shown in this picture, and also an automatic medication dispenser as shown by the second picture with the UA Biomed engineering group. The second device was actually submitted to the James Dyson Award a couple weeks ago. So any of the devices I've mentioned and those that I will mention all have one common purpose. They aim to make medical care easier. So to do this, medical devices can have a bunch of different functions, like gathering signals from brainwaves to initiate movement, or dispensing medication as per a schedule, or improving surgical procedures by visualizing them for the surgeon, or even preventing gum disease through everyday hygiene, like brushing your teeth. So does that mean anybody can pick up a wrench, write some code, and manufacture an entire surgical device? It seems really easy when you think that a toothbrush is a medical device. But in reality, it's not as simple as that. And the next part of my presentation addresses some Canadian rules that govern whether devices like these are allowed to be sold or not. So when medical devices undergo the design process, there is an extensive list of rules that they have to abide by. And to summarize some of the federal laws in Canada, first, as copies of devices are made, there are things that the manufacturers have to consider. So two things would be, first, each device has its own risks. These risks have to be documented, mitigated, and just identified for the consumers. The second thing would be users have to be able to control or take advantage of the functionality of these devices. So all software also must be included. And devices have to be distributed to reach the market. So manufacturers must also consider shipping and use. So those two things would be like to ensure that devices don't contaminate users or samples, sterilization methods must be verified, and the devices must also be shipped in sterile environments. The second thing would be, as devices are used, they can wear out, but one law requires that although it's used, within its lifetime, it should not be harmful or not functioning well with the user. And the third thing would be, even as devices are sold in pristine condition, all the software is included, all the risks are identified, there can still be incidents with consumers. So should any problems occur, recalls and complaints must be documented. So this includes any complaints received, reasons for any actions taken, whether it's responding to a complaint or recalling an entire device, or products sold in Canada, those must also be documented. And within that, there are its own subsections. So just where those products were sold, for how long they were sold, what specific regions in the different provinces they were sold, and so on. But still, knowing the risks and including the software are very broad topics. They don't necessarily mean a device is considered safe just yet. So that's why standards are so important. Some of the categories presented in this presentation just demonstrate how standards take specific areas of study and set different rules or regulations around them. So the first one I thought was relevant was biocompatibility. That would mean making sure materials are suitable for interactions with any biomaterials, which would be something like tissues, fluids, or organs, given the product's lifetime. So an example for our lab would mean laser cutting filter paper, where singed paper would contaminate samples that are supposed to be filtered. And in a medical context, we would not ship laser cut filter paper because it's not considered biocompatible. The second thing would be electromedical standards. So this includes any electrical equipment used in a medical setting, and that could be anything from the wiring that I was showing with the automatic pill dispenser to even the lights in a lab or in a hospital. Third category would be manufacturing. So this considers whether devices are safe, reliable, ready to use, and the only difference between this and electromedical standards is this considers the overall device itself, its shape, its materials that it's made of, and those kinds of things to answer questions like, does this device actually work? Does this device have any sharp edges? Are there any pinch points that people get hurt on while they're using this device? And lastly, materials. So this one's similar to biocompatibility, but this time we're focusing on what the device is made of itself and not so much the samples that it works with. So here we're considering strength, melting point, and flash points. And now we're considering questions like, will it break? Will it burn? Will it melt? Because in a real life example, that would be something like, we don't want neural implants dissolving in someone's blood. We don't want neural implants melting to someone's brain. We don't want these devices not able to withstand the conditions where they're actually being used. And one code that didn't fit these four categories, but didn't necessarily have its own category, was radio frequency disturbance for measurement devices. So this sets a standard for basically if there are radio waves interfering, or if there's interfering light or some sort of electromagnetic radiation, measurements can be skewed. And this is important in examples like our own assay machine, where light is used, and that light is used to determine concentrations through calculations. If the light's wrong, the calculations are wrong, and the diagnosis of things like colon cancer could be wrong, which is not good. Well, so now that we've established how medical devices are considered safe to sell, a procedure similar to the surgery and agreements behind OzCam actually receiving the implants, I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight some other kinds of medical devices and how they're able to improve medicine. So the first example I'd like to present is a surgical device used for endoscopy, a procedure where surgeons can actually see the inside of what they're operating on. This device is called the ENT navigation system, manufactured by Stryker's Canadian office in Burnaby, and ENT stands for ear, nose, and throat. The purpose of this device is to be used during functional endoscopy sinus surgery, FESS, a mouthful, but essentially what it means is surgeons can see the inside of cavities and pathways to make decisions on where to drain excess fluid, like a buildup of mucus or a buildup of saliva. So some important parts of this device include the platform, cart, and monitor setup, as shown in the picture on the left. And the general purpose is to generate magnetic fields that interact with the surgeon's tools to use to probe the patient. And with that comes the software, generally speaking, because it's able to convert the data from the tools into something that the surgeons can actually see in live time on a screen. And the third thing would be a specific kind of software. So it would be target guided surgery, TGS, and that's meant to overlay computer identified drainage pathways to help in the surgeon's decision-making when it comes to making those drainage pathways for excess fluid. And this is all in live time while the surgery is actually happening. This is actually a very interesting machine because without it, it would be difficult to see the inside of drainage pathways because, well, they're inside the patient's nostrils, throat, or anywhere else. So the next example is a device that makes use of the brain-computer interface, BCI. So this example is the implantable devices developed by Neuralink, which recently got FDA approval for human testing. This device is conceptually similar to those implants OzCam received, except they differ in functionality and they're not from the same company. So this device is meant to translate neural impulses into data that we can interpret. This data allows us to understand whether neural signals correspond to certain muscle movements or thoughts, And that can be used to facilitate a connection between the brain and a computer, or the brain and robotic limbs, the brain and your own limbs, or your brain and some other peripheral device. So in Ozcam's case, these kinds of implants were used to restore functionality to his legs. So in a publication by Neuralink, there were 3 highlighted features of this device. And the first one is electronics, shown by A in the figure. So one challenge with neural implants is discerning noise or non-useful interfering signals from useful signals. And even when we have these signals, translating these into data that we can interpret instead of just pulses of electricity or chemicals moving around, because that would be a lot harder to interpret. The second thing would be signal reading threads. So these threads physically interface with brain cells or neurons and take advantage of smaller threads, because smaller threads mean you can interface with one neuron or fewer neurons. And that, in the larger sense, makes the difference between moving one muscle and moving another muscle. And that's really important for fine motor control. And the third thing would be the implanting robot, which is not shown in this figure. So 2 problems with smaller threads is they can bend much easier and they require precision to place. So having a surgeon sit down and place every single thread for 1,000 threads or more would be very inaccurate and time consuming. And this isn't good because it reduces the likelihood of this device actually working. So repeatability, precision, and speed are all advantages to using an implanting robot instead. And my third and last example is something lab members might be a little bit more familiar with, our own assay machine. So the purpose of this device is to automate lab procedures that would typically be performed by hand. And the big thing here is that these reactions result in colored products, which is detected by a light sensor. So some features of this machine include peristaltic pumps, as shown at the top of these different towers, and they're used to transfer solutions or samples between the different towers. The second thing would be the towers themselves, which have functions of storing, mixing, filtering, and performing elutions on solutions. So the current version has an elution tower, which replaces this entire left side, and a filter tower, pipette tower, and reservoir. The pipette tower is on the far right, and the reservoir is right in the center. And the third part of this machine is the color sensor. So it's used to obtain an amount of red, green, and blue RGB lights and plot it against known concentrations. And we want to do this because when we're making calibration curves, we take known concentrations and convert them into their different color codes. And when we're in the fields, we'll take unknown samples, unknown concentrations, find their RGB combination, and backtrack to find the supposed concentration. So in other words, low concentration, low green can mean low concentration of some chemical, high green can mean high concentration of some chemical, and using that, a bunch of other chemicals and some clinical factors, we're able to tell whether we're able to predict whether someone has colon cancer or not. And there's also a custom board that we've been using for the latest version right behind this aluminum bar. And it takes up a lot less space than all the Arduinos and breadboards shown in the figure right here. So that's another feature of this device. So today I presented some examples of medical devices, including our own automated assay machine, Stryker's ENT navigation system, and Neuralink's BCI implants. And as novel as they are, these technologies are kept to a standard using national regulations, along with different categories of codes, like biocompatibility codes, electromedical, manufacturing, and materials codes as well. And if there's one thing I wanted all of you to take from this presentation, it's that medical devices are capable of changing how we live, and more importantly, in my opinion, how we heal. This can be from everyday hygiene to visualizing surgical procedures to even restoring the ability to walk. Thank you for your time, and I'll gladly answer any questions.
Thanks, Brian. This is a very nice presentation.